It's important for parents, especially white parents, to talk to their kids, because if not, it's going to hit them with a ton of bricks later on as they get older.
You're listening to the Mindful Mama podcast, episode number 249. Today, we're talking to Carolyn Helsel and Joy Harris-Smith about how to talk to kids about diversity. Welcome to the Mindful Mama podcast, now with over 1 million downloads. Here, it's about becoming a less irritable, more joyful parent. At Mindful Mama, we know that you cannot give what you do not have, and when you have calm and peace within, then you can give it to your children. I'm your host, Hunter Clarke-FIELDS Mindful Mama mentor. I help smart, thoughtful parents stay calm so they can have strong, connected relationships with their children. I've been practicing mindfulness for over 20 years. I'm the creator of the Mindful Parenting course, and I'm the author of Raising Good Humans, a mindful guide to breaking the cycle of reactive parenting and raising kind, confident kids. Welcome back to the podcast, my friend. I hope that you are doing well. And of course, a special welcome to new listeners. This is going to be a powerful episode. In just a moment, I'm going to sit down with Carolyn Helsel and Joy Harris-Smith, authors of the book, The ABCs of Diversity, Helping Kids and Ourselves Embrace Our Differences. Talking about diversity, right? Like, we need to talk about these things, but it can be hard. It can be comfortable talking about racial diversity and lifestyle differences, right? So the thing is, it's our job. It's our job to raise the next generation to respect and learn from people who look or believe differently than we do. Carolyn and Joy offer practical ways to build compassion and empathy in our children. And we talk about, how we have to practice restraint when answering questions from kids. How our kids watch everything we say. Once again, it always comes back to modeling. It really, really matters. And how actually food can be a really cool point of entry into experiencing different cultures, right? Pretty cool. I love this. So I know you're going to love this episode. Please, of course, take a screenshot and let me know where you're listening and what your takeaways are. And I will love to see that. I'm looking forward to doing it. I think that this conversation about diversity is something that was so needed, right? We can clearly see it's so needed that we have to make change, and we can make change in our own lives, right? We want to change the world. Let's start with our own lives. And if we can do things in our own lives, that makes all the difference in the world. Really is awesome. So I am so psyched for you to dive into this conversation. Let's get to it. Carolyn, Joy, thank you guys both for coming on the Mindful Mama podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you. A friend of mine put your book in my hands, and your timing, well, as we talked about, maybe like book tour wise is not so good, but your timing for this book, The ABCs of Diversity, is really good, right? Because we are really seeing how much we need this work and how to talk to kids about it and how to understand it more in our own lives. So this is awesome. I'm so glad that you're able to do this, and this book just kind of popped into my life. And you both shared talking about this book from different perspectives. Carolyn, you're a white person, and Joy, you're African-American Black person, right? So you come together and share these different perspectives, which I really appreciate. I love that combining together. And you talk about how the language of diversity is a new language. And I was wondering if you could talk to that a little bit more, because a lot of us, as parents, were raised in this, we're all just one kind of generation, I think. Me, at least as a 42-year-old, we were kind of raised in that way. And we, of course, know now wasn't so effective. So what is the difference in this language that we need right now? Anyone want to take that?
Go for it, Carolyn.
Well, the language of diversity is this idea that all of us come from such different backgrounds, and just assuming that we all speak the same language assumes that we share the same experiences. And so what we're trying to do in this book is help people acknowledge that there is this language of diversity. There is this ability to talk across our differences, but it has to be learned. It's not something that our parents can necessarily just give to us, or the ones that raised us gave to us, but it's something that we can learn, and that's one of the tools that we're hoping to give readers of this book.
And I think if I can add to that, it would be the fact that it has to be an intentional, you have to be intentional about doing that. We don't all speak the same language, and just like we put in effort to learn a language, whether we're required to or whether we just want to, there has to be an intentionality. And I think given our current social climate, that is extremely evident, is that if we're not intentional about it, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, or it's going to be pretty unskillful, and it's going to get pulled into different sides of extremes and things like that. It seems like. So, and I love the way you guys talk about you acknowledge the difficulties, right? You acknowledge that we have these patterns within us that prevent us from kind of engaging with this. Like, so I know that there's a lot of that it's difficult, right? Like we're seeing that for a lot of people that it's difficult to there, just the whole like Black Lives Matter has brought up a lot of difficulty for a lot of different people. And it's hard for people to sometimes engage with that. And I love the way you name these patterns. So maybe if you want to share what those patterns are. You talk about them as the ABCs, right? Like, so I don't know, Joy, you want to share what are those patterns that the way we pull back, right? That keep us from engaging.
Sure. I'm just going to bring it up now because as we're talking about children, I have two littles, a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old who are very much in my space. So I'm just bringing it up right now. Just give me 1 second. Okay, Eden. Okay, and I apologize because she's literally right on top of me. Here it is. All right. Here we are. Okay, so the book is framed with 3 different sets of ABCs, and I'll do the first. And I guess that will give Carolyn time if she would like to do the second, or I can do them all. It's automatic ABCs. So it's that these ABCs, these are unhelpful, but predictable responses. The A stands for afraid, the B stands for backing away, and the C stands for control. And these are unhelpful responses to learning the language of diversity. So if you're afraid, you ask yourself, what makes you feel afraid in this space? When you notice yourself backing away, physically backing away, you're asking yourself why, especially when you notice that. And then control, if you notice the impulse to control the circumstances, the conversation, where you're going, what you're doing, if it's possible, observe those reactions, write them down, and then rather than running away from them, give yourself an opportunity to really just confront them. What is helpful about these ABCs is that this first set is that these are all bodily, visceral reactions that we have, and sometimes they're just unconscious. And so again, there goes that intentionality piece. We're asking people, particularly adults, to start to go, to notice, to slow down for a minute. And again, given our social context, right, we've had to slow down and start to notice these aspects of ourselves.
I love this because it's mindfulness, right? Like you don't use that word, but it's mindfulness. It's like, check inside, notice this feeling of like, maybe there's this fear, maybe there's this backing away. And you're right. Like, I think it's generally unconscious. People just often register like maybe a discomfort feeling. And that like, this is what mindfulness asks us to do, is to is to look at like, what are these places of discomfort and see what they're teaching us. And that's exactly what you're doing, and saying that and acknowledging that, yeah, okay, so if you're, dear listener, like entering into a situation where there's differences and diversities, then you're that this is natural. This may be a natural response for you, or a habitual response, and that's okay. Like, that's normal. I love the way that like this normalizes that, but you invite this mindfulness to say, okay, yes, this is here. And then you offer like, what do we do with this? So I don't know if you want to take it from there as far as like what, these kind of intentional, like the ways that we can then engage it. Like, okay, I'm noticing this fear, noticing this discomfort, noticing I kind of want to back away, or I want to talk too much because or whatever. How do we engage with that?
Yeah, well, if you don't mind, Joy, I can take the next one. The ABCs of intentional engagement. So once we've acknowledged that we have this fear, this sense of wanting to back away, or this desire to control, once we kind of activate that kind of intentional awareness, then we kind of get to move towards becoming more intentional. How do I engage with this difference that's in my midst, whether it's a new cultural experience, or talking to someone and realizing that they have a different perspective than I do. It can be a number of different situations in which we're present and we notice these reactions coming up. And the second set of ABCs, the A stands for acknowledge. So it's that moment of awareness, of becoming aware of those unhelpful initial responses. And the B stands for being present, as a way of kind of accepting, okay, this is where I am. This is the discomfort I'm feeling. I don't need to run away from those feelings. I'm just going to sit here with that. And actually, with the C, we learn to come closer. We learn to enter into that discomfort, staying in that situation, whatever it is that's made us uncomfortable. And we try to actually come closer. Maybe it's even moving in closer proximity to the person that we have backed away from, and staying in this conversation. And coming closer may also be becoming more engaged in your community with whatever discomfort you're experiencing there. So it's a moment of intentionally engaging with whatever situation is inviting you to consider this language of difference through acknowledgement, being present, and coming closer, this kind of entering into the space to say, okay, I'm going to fully engage with this moment of diversity and difference.
Stay tuned for more Mindful Mama podcast right after this break. As I have watched the news and what's going on around the world with the pandemic, my heart is breaking for the way so many people are suffering all around the world. And child sponsorship is this amazing way to help where people are really suffering. So child sponsorship is you making a decision to provide $39 a month to a child and their community in extreme poverty to provide the most basic necessities of life, but most importantly, you provide hope. It is one of the most effective ways to help the world's most vulnerable children and their communities address the impacts of this pandemic and lift themselves out of poverty for good, especially now. In the world's most fragile places, devastating aftershocks of the COVID-19 crisis are pushing families deeper into poverty, putting kids at greater risk of hunger, malnutrition, violence, and neglect. For me to see what is happening around the world, it just really makes this so important. When I think about the relative privilege and comfort I have in my life compared to what I have suffered maybe in this pandemic, compared to what people in vulnerable parts of the world in poverty are suffering, it really makes everything so much clearer to me. And it's heartbreaking. The reality is thousands of children are waiting to be sponsored. But what you don't know is that everything is about to change. So for the first time, World Vision is inviting you to empower a child through sponsorship. Yet, this is so cool. Instead of you choosing them, they choose you, something no NGO has ever done before. It doesn't matter who you are, where you in the world you live, every single one of us wants to be seen, to be loved, and to be chosen. Put the power to choose in a child's hands and give someone a chance to step into a life-changing relationship with you. Visit worldvision.org/hunter and sponsor a child now. That's worldvision.org/hunter. Awesome. I love this instruction, but so how do we do this? How have you guys done this in your own lives? Like when you've had some moments and whatever.
Well, I shared this experience, I think, later in the book when I'm talking about maybe political differences. I was at a family event where it's just me and my husband with my kids, and then two of my sister's kids, and they're older than my kids. They're like in high school or young adulthood, and then some other kids that are early, teens and tweens. And we start getting around the table, and something political comes up. And all of a sudden, I'm learning about these perspectives of my nieces that are very different from my own political background. And so as I'm reflecting on it afterwards, immediately I kind of want to control the conversation. I kind of want to steer it a little differently and get my nieces to think a little differently. But rather than having that kind of impulse, I think if I had been more intentional about coming closer, I could have learned more from that experience. So it's not a positive example of how I was able to do it, but rather thinking back, if I had had the presence of mind to say, wow, they have a very different view, and rather than me feeling like I needed to control or back away, what if I had just acknowledged this difference and was present with that and moved closer, which would have meant asking them more questions and getting to know them more to figure out where this particular idea was coming from. I may have learned more and deepened that relationship.
Yeah. It's like this curiosity, but we all have this kind of impulse to, like, if we're feeling uncomfortable, to like fix it, right?
Yeah.
Joy, have you had any of those? Like, so how do you, have you had this in your own life? Like noticing these impulses, noticing this backing away, but then engaging with that, coming closer?
Yes. One of the stories that I mentioned in the book is my children and I were coming, we live in a cooperative, and we were coming up in the elevator, and there was someone in the elevator, and, they were neighborly. They said hello. We said hello and got off the elevator on the first floor, get to the door. And, as a parent, sometimes you can kind of feel or sense something coming. Your kid is about to say something. And just as I'm getting the key in the door, my son goes, "So is that a boy or a girl?" And I'm going, "Oh, God." And it was just kind of like, and the elevator door hadn't started closing yet, so it's lingering. And I tried to ignore it. Yeah. And so after, so then he asked again. The elevator still hasn't closed. And I'm going, oh my God. So I said, well, take a deep breath in. I'm like, so what do you think? And then he starts to kind of giggle. He's like, well, I think it's I think he might have said it was a female. I don't remember exactly what his response was. And I said, well, you might be right. And I said, but the important point is that they're neighborly. And that's what's most important. And if I can just say really quickly, even at one of the neighborhood grocery stores, there's a transgender man that has been standing outside, and she has been, just offering her assistance if people need help with groceries. And really wonderful and personable, but because of our societal situations and the culture of the community, people really kind of first. And then as they realize this person's a really nice person, you see people's guard they tend to kind of calm down, because they're just trying to make money and trying to earn something during this time. But that, it can be challenging. So I had to engage it. I with my kid, I had to engage it. And even with the person that is at the grocery store, even most recently, I try to be personable. I do speak to the person. I say hello because they're getting
Mhm.
a lot of rebuff. And the rebuff is not verbal rebuff, but it is nonverbal rebuff, which is just as powerful.
Well, it's interesting. It's like how we deal with differences, right? Like just
Mhm.
things we're not used to, and we aren't. I mean, I had a very similar experience. Like I was at a retreat, maybe 3 years ago now, and there was a trans woman there, and that was something that was really unusual for me in my life, and I could feel that I felt really uncomfortable around this person. And I think at that point, I didn't have the wherewithal. I did not come closer. I stayed away,
Mhm.
and for at least what I hope, at least for me, is that it was a situation that made me start to think, made me start to question, maybe start to say, look at these reactions in my body. But this is like pretty normal human behavior in a lot of ways. Like we are primed by our biology to have like in-group, out-group kind of stuff. So and kids see all of our differences, and so we know that we need to talk about our differences, right? But it becomes really tricky, like um you know and I love this idea of like we want to come closer, and you recommend also like going to places like kind of like helping to normalize differences in general sort of in your life, like get out of maybe if you're like in some white suburban bubble, like try to bring yourself to places to get out of that. um, talk to me a little bit more about how we can start to like why we should push against these kind of evolutionary kind of in-group out-group kind of biases that we naturally have, and how we can push against them.
Well, I know that so I think that you're correct in that there are some aspects of us we look for similarities, right? And I think that aspect of it is normal. But those things aren't necessarily racist or racial. They
Mhm.
become that over time, right? Because psychologists have always noted that children, even as young as like 6 months, notice the differences in people, and they gravitate toward people who look similar to them, but that's not necessarily a racial issue.
Mhm.
And then when we look back even in history, groups of different cultures have always intermixed and intermingled for reasons of survival.
Mhm.
And I think that, that's even happening now in our sort of extremely globalized world and culture. Natural resources, what's happening with the earth. If we don't learn, we're going to be in a dire situation because every part of the world doesn't have all of the natural resources, and we're going to have to work together to share. And I think that's where the third, ABCs comes in, the interpersonal, because all communication, I believe, it begins from an interpersonal, is building a more, just society. And it's looking at access, that's A, build for B, and C is cultivate. And access is looking at, what do you have at your disposal for interpersonal or social dynamics? What resources or networks of relationships or skills do you have access to that you can help others gain access so that they can better navigate life or a particular world? For build, how can you build upon what you already know? You may not know the intricacies of another culture, but you may know certain things that you might know some resources. You might be a connector of people, or spaces or resources. But all of these can facilitate a deeper connection. And then finally is cultivate. And I think that's the intentionality piece again. More specifically, how can you contribute to the mutual flourishing of yourself and the people you are getting to know? And how can you cultivate within yourself a capacity for lifelong learning? As an educator, from doing K-12 and now graduate school, you never stop learning. I mean, you just don't. I think when we stop learning, then we die, right? When things
Mhm.
stop growing, they die, they cease to exist. And I think that that's where we need to move toward, is that we are always learning. So I'll
Mm.
just
Yeah. Well,
turn the mic over.
it's interesting. Like, okay, so this is where, you know, we want to think about what do we have access to. I thought about that as I was reading your book. I was like, oh, like, you know, there's certain things like, for instance, my husband has access to because he makes electronic music, and he has this whole world he has access to. And like, he could give that, he could, you know, he could open those doors in some ways to show that this world exists to a whole bunch of people who don't know it exists. He's an introvert, so I don't know if he could be crazy about this idea, but like, maybe can you speak to this a little bit more, Carolyn? Like, how do we, in practical terms, like, how do we do this, like, access, build, cultivate? How do we push against these kind of these boundaries that we feel?
Yeah, great question. Well, to honor all the introverts out there, I like to identify as a fellow lover of my alone time. But I also really thrive in one-on-one conversations and one-on-one relationships. And one of the experiences I've had of real kind of synchronicity of, you know, me having had an opportunity to get to know somebody else who enabled me to know about an organization that could help this other person happened just within the last few weeks. Last summer, a year ago, on Facebook, I was given an invitation to attend an anti-racism training event that was primarily for people who worked for the city. So people who were social workers and other people who were city employees. But it says they have a few openings for community members. So as someone who talks about racism but hasn't gone in a long time to a People's Institute Undoing Racism event, I thought, well, if it's open to the community, like, I'll go. And so I put myself in this position of going across the city of Austin to where they housed this event, which was at the Big Brothers, Big Sisters headquarters for the city. And I got to meet all of these amazing people who worked in different agencies for child protective services, or, you know, social workers who were in other agencies. And it was this powerful experience of connection for me and learning, to get to continue to learn through this anti-racism event. And at the end of that event, I got a card from one of the women that I met. And I had held on to that card, and I was looking at it, months later, and I showed up at an event of a book signing for Latasha Morrison, who wrote the book called Be the Bridge. And she does these bridge building communities where she has people, half people of color, half white people, who come and do this book study. And they're all Christian. It's kind of a Christian-based book study. But she's been doing this work, and she just had her book launch. And there on this panel, on this stage, was this woman whose card I had just seen and I had met a few months prior. And she apparently was one of the earliest members of this Be the Bridge group. And so afterwards, I got to connect with her, and I was like, oh my gosh, great to see you. And then months later, with everything that's going on after the murder of George Floyd, she's leading some events in Austin to do protests, and we connect online again. And I know of her as someone who works in social services. Meanwhile, I have this acquaintance that I've been getting to know, a woman who I've asked to come help me clean my house. I've got 2 kids and a husband, but we are not all on the same page when it comes to getting our house clean. So, I finally am like, okay, I just need to acknowledge we need some help with this. So she's been helping us clean the house. She'll come every so often on a regular basis. And we'll get to talking. Her Spanish, her English is not great. My Spanish is not great, but we are able to have conversation. And I've gotten to know about her family and, her kids. And we have this relationship. But about a month or so ago, she just shares with me that, she has left her husband after over a dozen years of realizing she needed to leave him. And, she's telling me her story and her experiences. And it's this really kind of heavy moment for me. And after she leaves that day, I think, gosh, I wonder if this person that I've met who is this social worker would have any idea of resources that could help this person. And I connect with her over Facebook, and she says, I've just switched agencies. This is the agency I work for now. That's exactly the kind of person that we help right now.
How serendipitous.
Right. Yeah. And so it was this beautiful moment of me being able to access resources because I had built these other relationships that could then help this woman get additional support and help. So all of that took a little bit of courage of saying, I'm going to be in uncomfortable places and learn more about different things that are going on in my city, and be able to develop a relationship with someone who we didn't share the same language perfectly, but we shared the language of the heart and the language of wanting to care for one another through these conversations. And that's what it takes. Just, it takes a little bit of courage, the acknowledgement that we're not going to say the right thing all the time. But we who have access to resources, and there may be people who have plenty of resources otherwise, but who really need certain kind of resources that maybe we can help give access to in those relationships.
Stay tuned for more Mindful Mama podcast right after this break. Okay, so I have to let you know about the face masks. We are wearing so many face masks, obviously, for the pandemic, and it's a way to be responsible and things like that, but some are better than others. My family has been so excited about the Braddock face mask. They are the most comfortable face masks that we have worn by far. My daughter is a scout, and she's been doing all this backpacking, and they're wearing face masks during the scouting and the backpacking. And these masks are the most comfortable, moisture wicking. They actually feel good. She really loves them. They're definitely her favorite. And they do this by using premium upcycled fabrics. They're super soft and breathable. Plus, they have moisture wicking technology to keep your face nice and cool. And they're really soft, really, really comfortable. I love that Braddock has like 4-packs and 5-packs. They have these adorable daisy print, and my family really likes the tie-dye print. So maybe if you'll have that purple tie-dye, we'll have it too. We want to have face masks that don't suck to wear, that are reusable, and they have ones for kids that are so adorable. 3-packs for kids. So I want all my listeners to listen closely, because you're going to get 25% off your mask when you use the promo code HUNTER that they have extended for a limited time. So you can go to BraddockUSA.com and get 25% off using that promo code. Did I tell you they're machine washable, and they are holding up after dozens and dozens of washes? We used to go through dozens of masks, but not anymore with these Braddock upcycled face masks. And upcycled basically means they're brand new existing fabrics that they repurpose for their masks, reducing waste and materials. Less waste equals less harm to the environment, and these are made right in LA. So they're so comfortable. You're going to love them. Go check out their website, BraddockUSA.com. You'll see they already have great prices, but for a limited time, we're going to hook you up with an additional 25% off with the promo code HUNTER on your first purchase. That's 25% off your entire order for a limited time with the promo code HUNTER at BraddockUSA.com. BraddockUSA.com. One final note. For every purchase using the code, the guys at Braddock are donating masks to those in need. Braddock has already donated thousands of masks to nurses and healthcare workers and first responders across the country. So go to BraddockUSA.com, use the promo code HUNTER. This conversation brings me back to, I talked to Nefertiti Austin, the author of Motherhood So White, last year. And she talked about challenged challenged me and the listener and everyone, to go build bridges and to look at our own friend groups and things like that. And I thought, oh, this is interesting because like for me personally, like I live in like a really pretty white community other than my immediate neighbors. And it really made me sort of think, and it's been interesting kind of like in the time since then, I have been more intentional about crossing bridges for, and for me, I'm psyched that I did ultimately, because I actually have like some friends that are now different from me in a lot of different ways. And it's really fulfilling and like great friends that we just like keep constantly like talking over each other again and again. And we just can't, we end up like talking for like 4 hours because we can't just stop talking. And it's like awesome. And it may not have been, if I had not been challenged to intentionally make bridges outside of my comfort zone of the people I already know, and I'm already just kind of, this person, that naturally connected to, it may not have happened. And anyway, I want to offer that for the listener because, what you're asking scares people to say, oh, I should go do something that's like not in my comfort zone to go to this place, right? And so maybe I was wondering if you could maybe offer maybe any more guidance around that. Cause like, it's so interesting. Like when we think about that, like, like sometimes I think like, I've always like had this like curiosity about like wanting to like go to like, for instance, like a Black church where they do like tons of singing. Like my brother, like he went with some friend to some church. He was like, it was so awesome. It was super fun. And I'm like, that sounds amazing. But I would like never just be like, here I am by myself. I'm just going to show up. Hi, everybody. Like even just thinking about it, like you guys on the video can see how red my face is going, So what are like the intermediary steps between like doing like the really, really scary thing and then not doing anything at all because those steps are too scary for people? You know what I mean?
I have a student. It made me think of a student of mine that I had in intercultural communication in the church, and she grew up in the Midwest, and I believe this, as the story goes, her father was adopted, and he is of Asian descent. I believe it's Korean, and so she really just grew up in a predominantly white space, but knowing that that's part of her heritage, and she started to wonder about it. And her entry point has always been food. And so I think it's finding an entry point that you can enjoy. And that's how most people begin to gain exposure to different cultures, is they try the food. And so it's usually not as intimidating, right, as having the conversation, but it can build up. In the education world, we talk about building schema, building people up, developing them so that they can then take in the next bit of information. Well, we all have to eat, right? So one way to engage that is, I think in New York, they have Restaurant Week, or different major cities, they have these restaurant weeks, right? And there's all this kind of food, right? I forgot what the company is. There's one of these like delivery chains, and it's talked about, all the different kinds of food that they have, and they call it American food. Like all the different range of food is now American food. Like American food is not American food now without Thai or without Southern, barbecue. It's just not, because that's what we, everybody tries it. And so even if you have a particular cultural food that you eat, most of us have tried something, even if it's an Americanized version. So finding your entry point, finding a safe way where you can do something different, but you don't feel like you're completely overly, you do need to expect some level of vulnerability, right? You do.
But that place, like outside your comfort zone, but just a little bit outside your comfort, right? Like they talk about that as like the growth zone. Okay, so we want to talk a little bit about how to talk to kids about this. You guys are both moms. Kids are noticing these differences. What are some of the ways that we can be talking to kids about differences at different levels. And then also like, what do we do in those situations when your kid's like, mommy, like, and they ask a really embarrassing question. So yeah, what are some of the ways, well, maybe what are some of the ways we can start to talk about the kids? And I want to think also about kids in different circumstances, because some kids are in really diverse circumstances and some kids are like in the bubble of people who just look like them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You want to take that, Carolyn? You want to start?
Carolyn, you are muted, my friend.
I can't start unless I'm unmuted. That's right. Well, and one of those things is, it's funny that I started off muted, but in some ways it's good for us to start off muting ourselves in the conversation. And cool. If kids bring something up, to kind of mute our initial desire or explain something, and give them the full, as much as we know about a subject, and to ask them more, what brings that to mind? Can you tell me more about the situation? Can you tell me more about why you think that about that person? And it's often in hearing more about where our kids are that we can learn our starting point. So we often, out of our own anxiety, again, we want to jump in and fix it, but rather kind of how do we mute ourselves for just a minute and keep listening to our kids so that they can share where they are, because they're in a process of constantly adding to their schema. We don't know what kind of scaffolding they already have in place or need to have in place. So by listening, we can kind of first hear where they are in this situation.
One of the things that kids are used to, especially that K to 3, I guess they do that, is that show and tell. And I think as a teacher, it was something that I learned that even in my instruction, I needed to show and tell. And I think parents have to be willing to do the same. They can't just tell kids, they have to show and tell. So I think along with, what Carolyn said, muting yourself, listening. We don't talk enough about listening and being able to not just hear, but listen. That goes a step further. But to then show and tell. Well, how do we show and tell? One way to show and tell is, to use a book or to use books that show other people, or use what is happening on the TV and utilizing a moment to kind of, if the child asks a question or decide that you want to point something out, those are great opportunities to show and tell. And then parents, I did an interview a month ago, and I said, children learn a lot of lessons, but many of the lessons they learn are not the ones we teach directly. It's the indirect ones. Mm-hmm. So as you talked about, developing friendships outside of your comfort zone, those are the things your children are going to notice. They're going to pay attention to those. You could tell them that, but they see what you do. You know what I mean? My daughter watches me in the mirror. I remember one time her being 2 years old and saying to me, "Lip, mommy, lip." And I was like, "What?" And she was talking about lip gloss because she's watched me put on lip gloss several times. But I was just like, oh my God, she's watching me. And we forget that our children watch everything that we say and everything that we do. We don't think that they are all the time, and it feels like they ignore us sometimes. But that stuff is going on, being filed away. And so basically show and tell, and know that, what you do, they're watching. So those implicit lessons are just as important as the direct ones.
And that's why I think that whole first part of our conversation, kind of focusing on ourselves, is so appropriate, right? Because we have to live what we want our kids to learn. So it's not all nice and good to stay in our comfort zone and just stay, in a situation that maybe not have zero diversity at all, and like read some books, but they're seeing that, right? So it really does go back to us to kind of like go out of our comfort zone. But books are a great way to start, and maybe even a way for us to just, even to just remind ourselves, right? Like that this is important and this is valuable. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For older kids, just this past year, the television show Mixed August-ish came out that was led by the daughter of Diana Ross. I forget. She has this show where the mother is Black and the father is white, and the children are mixed race growing up in the 80s. And the premise of the show is that they started off from a commune. They'd previously been in a commune where race was no big deal. Everybody was one. And then, they moved out, and now they're in the real world. So that's kind of the premise of the plot. But it's been such an avenue for, my now 10-year-old to be having these conversations about race and racialization and how the mixed kids growing up in, elementary school and middle school are trying to navigate this. But there's a whole section on hair. And so thinking through, as we make these connections with our children, is helping children have a positive self-understanding, because there's so many ways for kids to get these negative messages early on about what's beautiful, what's not beautiful, what's okay, what's not okay. And so constantly, as we're talking about differences, using these opportunities to help our children not only accept others, but accept themselves. So early on, when my daughter was 3 and we were talking about Martin Luther King Jr. Day, I started talking about how Dr. Martin Luther King had to fight against these white people who didn't think Black people should have the same rights. And she's looking at me talking about the white people that Martin Luther King is working against. And she says, "Mom, are we white?" And, she's confused because she's hearing me talk about white people in this bad way, and, is identifying herself as part of this bad group. So I pulled up the images online that you can find of the March on Washington and zoomed in really close, and I was able to show her, look, see, yes, there were some white people who were there in the crowd. There were white people who were also supporting Dr. Martin Luther King. And so while there were a lot of people against him, there were a few that were working for him and supporting his work. And so that's really the role that we can take. We can be different kind of white people than these others. So however our kids identify, helping them find an avenue where they can feel proud of who they are and work towards making the world a better place.
Yeah, that's interesting because we don't, I think about that, the idea of that guilt, right? Like white guilt, and I wonder, it doesn't seem like that's in a lot of ways very maybe that helpful to for people to feel guilty about things that they, what I mean, that their ancestors, it's like a super complex issue, obviously, and so many, but how do we, it's interesting, we don't want, especially white kids, how do we prevent white kids from having either a false sense of superiority because that's the culture, or guilt, right? And navigate between those two. Is that something we might talk about with kids when they're a little older?
Well, did you want to start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I mean, so, just to there are two things about that. I think, as it relates to, there's a book about white privilege, and I think Jennifer Harvey, Raising White Kids, Bringing Up Children in a Racially Unjust America by Jennifer Harvey. She spoke on our book launch webinar. And she's one of several people who talk about this, but, dealing with white privilege is going to make white people uncomfortable. But that's the problem with racism. That's, racism, while people of color oftentimes, in particular Black people in the US especially, have been oppressed, the harm done to white children, unfortunately, is the belief of superiority. And then it manifests itself as guilt because their parents are not talking about it. They're not talking about the privileges that they have had. And then there's the belief of, superiority. And then when you start to unlearn it, it feels like a ton of bricks, right? It feels like a huge weight. Oh my God, I didn't mean to be this way, or I don't want to be this way. And so that's why it's important for parents, especially white parents, to talk to their kids, because if not, it's going to hit them with a ton of bricks later on as they get older. And we can't always account for the reactions. And so, you know, as kids have a strong sense of fairness. They know that concept really well. And again, there goes the entry point. You may not necessarily use the exact words of, you know, racial injustice and racial inequity, but you can talk about fairness, right? And you can say, well, do you think that that's right? Do you think that that's fair? Would that be fair if so-and-so did that? Or, you know, and then you can get the conversation and begin addressing it through, I think, fairness, because it's a concept that most kids, especially under, you know, the 5th grade, are going to understand very well, because they have a strong sense of it.
Oh yeah, all humans, a strong sense
right,
of
yeah,
fairness.
right, yeah. But they can relate to it.
Yeah. Okay, so we should be kind of like addressing these issues in an age-appropriate manner, so that there isn't this false sense of superiority, and then, you know, corresponding with that, as you know, waking up happens, a sense of guilt. Okay, cool, thank you, that was helpful for me. Yeah. Carolyn, what do you think? How do we help kids like have positive understandings around these different issues?
Yeah, one of the things that I really appreciate about books is the ways that kids, in reading some books, can identify with the main characters. And when the main character shares a different experience than the kids grow up, it really kind of expands their brain's ability to empathize and to understand that, wow, it's a lot harder for some other kids than it is for me. One of the recent books that my daughter read was Ghost Boys, and it's literally a boy who is shot by the police, and he becomes a ghost, and he's able to see what his family is going through in their mourning, but he also meets up with the ghosts of Emmett Till and Tamir Rice, other boys, and it's this powerful kind of book of him kind of finding other experiences and connecting with this history, and also seeing the people who are standing up and trying to work for justice. And so you get to understand a lot through this particular book. There's another book called Esperanza Rising that my daughter read that had to do with a daughter who their family was doing well in Mexico, and then the father died, and an uncle came over and took over everything. So to avoid having to remarry, a scoundrel, the mother, snuck away with the daughter in the night, and they become migrant workers in California. And so this girl growing up in privilege is now having to experience the life of a migrant and what that's like, and all the kinds of things about growing up. It just helps connect with today, like, wow, kids' experiences can be so different, even in modern day, with kids living in such different situations economically. So again, the ability of books to help kids understand, and also to see the cool things about other kids' culture, to be interested in learning Chinese and learning about a friend's background where the mother is Chinese and speaks Chinese, and encouraging kids to have those kinds of interests so that they go beyond the bubble of people who just look and sound like them.
All right, awesome. And then finally, maybe we can just like you have you talk about some ways for us to answer those embarrassing things, like, why is that man so dark? Those two women are holding hands, that woman is dressed weird, why is her whole head covered, right? When kids say some of those things, what should be our game plan as parents? Oh, Joy, you're muted.
Sorry. I think one of the things, and I think you touched upon that very early in the beginning, is that as you grow, right, then you're able to answer. You can't give your kids what you don't have. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like, well, you have to, whatever you don't know about the world or know about other people, you can only offer a possibility if you have some experience. So just, why is that woman's whole head covered? Well, if you don't know anything about Muslim or Islamic culture or anything like that, you can't really speak to it. You can just say probably that's her culture, that's her religion. But nowadays kids are gonna, that may not be enough. They may ask more. So parents have to, you know, develop themselves. But when, you know, I think that the question of, you know, why is her whole head covered? You know, the answer, you know, can be simply, it's her religion. They have a belief where, you know, people are supposed to be fully covered in public. But again, I think that that just comes with parents being able to know themselves. Why are the two women holding hands? Well, because they like each other, they love each other, or, you know, but you got to be willing to have some inkling, some idea about, you know, about what's going on in the world, and not a judgmental one, but some people have affection for someone who is also of the same gender, and that's normal and that's okay. And most people, there are many people who still struggle with that. But I think you have to be willing to again challenge yourself. I think that's where it resides for me. Parents have to really be willing to step outside their comfort zone and be willing to look around and know what's going on in the world to be able to answer those questions for their kids.
Yeah. It's about us getting a little more informed. It's interesting because it's like, you know, we have to walk that balance between like kind of like comforting and soothing ourselves and staying in our comfort zone some way, because the world is crazy and we can't just be like totally informed about everything because you go insane. And, you know, that's a bit of self-care, but it also to challenge ourselves to be outside that comfort zone a little bit. And that's to just slowly, progressively learn. I think that's really the invitation that I'm hearing from you.
Yeah. And in that part of the book where we mention some of those embarrassing opportunities for us to have learning experiences with our kids, it takes us being intentional and mindful in order to even begin to respond. So, you know, there's a few suggestions. I say the acronym for that would be you know, because at first we're kind of thrown off, you know, the embarrassment or the shock.
That's great.
But each of those A's, you know, stand for different things. You know, the first is as affirming. Once we've kind of gone through our own ABCs and we can affirm our discomfort, then we affirm our child's question. You know, you're right. You know, it sounds like you're noticing, you know, that those two women are holding hands. You've got a good set of eyes. You know, it's affirming the kid. And then the second A is to ask. You know, you know, do you see other grown-ups holding hands sometimes? What does it mean to you to hold someone's hand? So again, you're asking a question. You know, when you notice that man in the wheelchair, how does it make you feel? Have you ever seen someone in a wheelchair before? And then the next A, you know, admitting what you don't know. You know, maybe he was in a wheelchair because he was born that way, or maybe because he needs it to get around as fast as you and I can. So admitting when we're giving our best guess, you know, to our kids, but that we don't know all the answers. And then finally, we can, you know, the last A is, if it's possible, maybe even allow the other person to answer directly. So, you know, hi, you may have overheard my child asking a question about you. You know, I was wondering if she could ask you about your gender. I told her not everyone identifies as a boy or girl, and I wonder if you'd be willing to share with us your preferred pronouns. And again, it may not be something that the person wants to share, but it again shows our kids us trying to learn. You know, excuse me, my daughter noticed the two of you holding hands and she asked me about it. I told her maybe you two really liked each other. Was that an accurate guess? You know, it's kind of, again, letting them know you're trying to educate your child by also affirming, you know, their relationship. You're not there judging them, but so again, just some different examples with that acronym of acknowledging that we at first are scared and embarrassed, but it's also a beautiful opportunity for us to help our child grow into that discomfort of learning more about the differences around us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, Joy, Carolyn, I so appreciate you coming on the Mindful Mama podcast. I really appreciate your work with the book and and what you're doing and just sharing it in such a beautiful way. Where can people find out more about you and about the book?
Okay. Am I muted? Okay, no, I'm not. Okay, so www.abcsofdiversity.com. On Instagram, it is at abcsofdiversity.com. ABCs of Diversity. You can find us on the website and also on Instagram. Those are our two most active places. We do have a Facebook page as well. We're on a little summer hiatus, but we'll be back. We'll be back in the fall. But you can find us there most of the time.
Well, thank you so much. There are so many more questions I could have we talked about, and I think these are important conversations to have. So much thanks for doing this work together and putting this work out into the world. It's so needed, and of course for joining us here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I love how they suggested food as this great entry point into experiencing different cultures, right? I love that. That's so cool. I want to go to some, maybe we'll go to a Jamaican restaurant soon or something like that. That would be really cool. So wondering what you're going to do. What is your takeaway? What are you going to take from this? As far as how are you going to bring some more diversity into your life? This is clearly something we need, right? We need to break down these barriers. We need to do it ourselves. We need to do it in our lives, right? We want to change the world. That's great. We can talk a good talk, but we have to do it in our lives. We have to make our lives more diverse. And so I challenge you, do you have all friends of one race or ethnicity? And if so, why don't you challenge yourself to make a friend outside that if the opportunity arises? Push yourself to be a little bit more accepting, even if it makes you a little uncomfortable. That's okay. That's okay. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you're human. It's okay. But yeah, let's do this together. Let's go eat at some different restaurants and experience some different things and think about being that change that we want to see in our children, right? We want to build that compassion and empathy in our children for sure. I know it's so hard when we're all stuck inside with the pandemic. I hope that you're doing okay with everything, my friend. It's such a world, man. So going into this fall, our care for ourselves, our warm, comforting ourselves, being mindful with ourselves, or giving ourselves loving and realistic expectations, those things really matter even more. So please do that practice. Please start to practice noticing your thoughts and shifting them towards what is wholesome and healing for you and for your children. And I'll be practicing with you. And I'm wishing you a beautiful week, my friend. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. Of course, take a screenshot, right, of where you're listening and let me know what platform you're listening on. Take a screenshot. Let me know what your takeaways are. I want to know all that stuff. It's really let's bring it beyond the headphones. And if you're enjoying and getting a lot of the podcast, have you left a rating or review yet? Those reviews on Apple Podcasts, they make such a big difference. And I know it takes a minute to you have to stop and think about it and go somewhere. But it really makes such a huge difference in getting the Mindful Mama podcast out to the people who, need and want to hear it. So I really appreciate when you do that. And when you share it with your friends, it makes such a huge difference too. So thank you for those ways of supporting the podcast. Another great way to support the podcast is to get your copy of Raising Good Humans. And when you do, you can go to raisinggoodhumansbook.com and get the bonus meditations and things like that. So all great ways to support the podcast. And thank you so much for letting me into your life, into your ears. I appreciate your time is precious, and I really appreciate the value of giving that time over to connect with me and the people I find and all this information. So thank you. I really honor you for that. And I wish you a beautiful week, my friend. Wishing you peace and joy and all the good things. Namaste.
I'd say definitely do it. It's really helpful. It will change your relationship with your kids for the better. It will help you communicate better. And just, I'd say communicate better as a person, as a wife, as a spouse. It's been really a positive influence in our lives. So definitely do it.
I'd say definitely do it. It's so worth it. The money really is inconsequential when you get so much benefit from being a better parent to your children and feeling like you're connecting more with them and not feeling like you're yelling all the time or you're like, why isn't things working? I would say definitely do it. It's so worth it. It'll change you.
No matter what age someone's child is, it's a great opportunity for personal growth and it's a great investment in someone's family. I'm very thankful I had this.
You can continue in your old habits that aren't working, or you can learn some new tools and gain some perspective to shift everything in your parenting.
Are you frustrated by parenting? Do you listen to the experts and try all the tips and strategies, but you're just not seeing the results that you want? Or are you lost as to where to start? Does it all seem so overwhelming with too much to learn? Are you yearning for a community of people who get it, who also don't want to threaten and punish to create cooperation? Hi, I'm Hunter Clarke-FIELDS, and if you answered yes to any of these questions, I want you to seriously consider the Mindful Parenting membership. You will be joining hundreds of members who have discovered the path of mindful parenting and now have confidence and clarity in their parenting. This isn't just another parenting class. This is an opportunity to really discover your unique, lasting relationship, not only with your children, but with yourself. It will translate into lasting, connected relationships, not only with your children, but your partner too. Let me change your life. Go to mindfulparentingcourse.com to add your name to the waitlist, so you will be the first to be notified when I open the membership for enrollment. I look forward to seeing you on the inside. mindfulparentingcourse.com.